All right. Thank you guys so much for participating in our walkthrough form process today. We are going to be creating a new walkthrough form for Weatherford. So before we get started, if everyone will just go around and introduce themselves. I'm Rachel Ashby. I'm an instructional coach at Weatherford.
My name is Olivia DeSantiago, and I am the Dyslexia Support Specialist.
Dawn Robershaw. I will be teaching 4th and 5th grade social studies and science.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Because it's freezing a lot on my end. I'm Crystal Routinier. I'm an ESL coach.
Lee Wetzel, paraprofessional.
Erin Dickerson, gifted specialist. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. Before we get started, if I could have somebody volunteer to be the timekeeper, that would be wonderful.
I can do it.
All right. Thank you, Crystal. And then if I could have someone volunteer to be the recorder, just to take notes on the side of that. Olivia, would you mind taking notes?
Do you want me to do it on a Google Doc or the thing that you
Just on
sent?
that agenda where it just says notes right there.
Okay, got it.
That would be great. Thank you so much. And then if I could just have a reporter to read the norms to us. Dawn, would you mind reading the
I
norms?
can read them, but where are the norms at?
They're on that. I'll share my screen. They're on that agenda, but I'll share it right here so you can see them on your screen.
Okay, yeah, please.
Make sure I'm sharing the right thing. Okay. Can y'all see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we will create a safe space to be vulnerable, judgment-free zone, provide time to process information, are prepared and have a purposeful meeting, are respectful, loyal, and maintain professionalism, are organized, agenda, clear expectation, and materials.
Perfect. Thank you guys so much. So our goal today is by the end of the meeting, we will have created a new walkthrough form that identifies the essential instructional behaviors we should see in every classroom. So before we get too far into everything, I wanted to talk about the purpose of a walkthrough form. And the purpose of a walkthrough form is more for development and not just evaluation. So we're not talking like a t-test observation or anything like that. This is just that continual development we want to see over the course of the year. And it's to create that cycle of feedback between the teacher and the administration. Okay. So now that we know the purpose, we're going to look at our data and we're going to kind of figure out why we're creating this walkthrough form and what we need to look for as we're doing these walkthroughs. So as you can see from 2022 to 2023, this is our TAPER report, our Texas Academic Performance Report. We grew in almost every area. So in reading for approaches, we went from 70 to 72. For math, we went from 68 to 70. And then for science, we went from 49 to 55. However, our meets and masters have really kind of stalled out. And even though we are seeing growth in those numbers, it's not necessarily at the level we would want to see, right? We want to see a high, because we know our kids are coming in a little bit lower than the average, we want to see a higher rate of growth. Hang on one second. I think I'm going to stop sharing for just a second. It sounds like Olivia can't type in the document. That would be helpful.
I made a copy so I can just...
Perfect. Thank you, Olivia. And then
So
I'm going to share this one with you just so.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. Okay. Okay. So Now that we've looked at that academic data, I want to kind of look at the data we got from the walkthroughs we did this year. So in our current walkthrough form, we look at several different areas, but one of the things I wanted to look at first is just that guided learning section of the block, the I do, we do, you do. And the blue is reading, the red is math, and then the orange is other, so like science or social studies or something like that. And I want you to think about what you notice with the I do, the we do, and the you do. Does anybody see a pattern in any of that or something that stands out?
The math, clearly, I do to we do jump significantly.
Yeah, so the blue is the reading, but we're definitely seeing we do that guided practice in the math more than any other subject. So we kind of want to see how can we replicate that guided practice where the kids are actually doing something into other subjects as well. The other thing I wanted to show was we've really focused on that interaction and collaboration skill in using structured conversations. And this is kind of the summary of where we were with all the observations we saw. A lot of teachers were trying it out. They were seeing it. We were seeing it like start to happen in the classrooms, but we were definitely still mostly in that emergent phase. So we definitely still need some practice and some ongoing feedback with that. Okay. Some of us were moving into that approaches, and then a few of us were in that development. The good news is not very many people just didn't have it at all. Everybody was, for the most part, was trying something. So now we just want to work on the mastery of that. Okay. So now that we have looked at our data.
You have 2.5 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that you feel as teachers in the classroom every day? What are some things that you've noticed with, especially with that interaction and collaboration skill?
It definitely helps the students, those that don't want to participate, kind of forces them to participate and talk, especially with the ESL kids, having sentence stems available for them, and moving around helps, I think, them talk more in class.
Yeah, I agree totally. Anybody else?
If the
I think
teacher is actively observing or monitoring, they can correct misconceptions because the kids are talking to each other.
Yeah, and you're hearing it right there in the moment. Yeah, definitely. Crystal, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that I think for some classrooms, teachers are a little bit hesitant to lose control, quote unquote, of the classroom. And so I think it's just more discussions about that and about the role of the teacher and the role of the student during this interaction time.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so now that we've looked at all the data, I want to look at some examples of walkthrough forms. We're going to start by looking at the current walkthrough form that we use at Weatherford, and then we're going to look at some other examples. Okay, so this is our current walkthrough form. So it starts by whoever's walking in just notes the component that they're observing. And if something else is happening, like, you know, a class celebration or guidance or something like that, it gets noted down there. Okay, and then we look at if students are interacting and collaborating. And the rubric is linked here. And we just click what area of the rubric we find. And there is a place to leave like specific feedback if needed. Okay. Then it goes into the quality components of a math classroom and the quality components of a literacy classroom. Okay. And the goal is not to check every box with these. The goal is just to note what we're seeing. And then there's a spot for glows and a spot to leave any growth feedback. All of this the components of a quality classroom comes from the curriculum planner and what EAS, or Elementary Academic Services, has outlined as the non-negotiable components in both a literacy and a math classroom. Okay, so before we move on to the next one, I just want to think about what are some pros of our current Weatherford form? What are some things we like about it?
The glow and grow.
Like the glow and grow? Okay. Anybody else?
It's specific as to what should happen in each part of a lesson.
Yeah, it's really clear what components should be in a strong, effective lesson. What about some cons? What are some things we don't necessarily like about it?
I don't know if it's necessarily I don't like about it, but as a teacher, I've never seen that before.
Okay,
So
so
as
you're
a
not getting the
teacher-
feedback from it.
No, as a teacher, I would want to know when people are coming into my classroom, what are you looking for? Like I've not seen that form before.
Okay. So we definitely need to improve that feedback part of it so that you're actually aware of what we're looking for and you're aware of what we saw in your classroom.
Yeah.
Okay, definitely. All right, so now that we've talked about our current form, we're going to look at some examples. Some of these are from like research-based practices, and then one of them is from an actual school district. So this is from just a random school district that I found on Google, but this is their feedback form. So they've got the classroom activity observed up here, and then they have like check boxes for each domain of the walkthrough. Okay, and then so the person who's observing just checks off what they see happening, or and then just there's a spot for recommendations or questions to think about the observation later down at the bottom. Okay, what are some pros we see about this? Are there any components of this we'd want to take into our own walkthrough form?
I mean, we don't really consider classroom environment or student behaviors.
Yeah.
I do think this is rather lengthy.
Yeah.
And if you're the person doing the walkthrough, it would be a lot to try to like sift through and think through.
Yes, I agree. I like that. It does include like the classroom environment. But I think that this is overwhelming, and I'm just thinking of myself in classroom teacher mode. And I'm thinking if I got this, it would be kind of stuffed in a corner somewhere probably to look at a later date that I would find on the last day of school and never have really gone over, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the next one we're going to look at is from the Meadows Institute. And you're going to see this one is much more simple. It's just you leave feedback for every single one of these, and you either leave a plus that you saw it or a minus that you didn't see it. And then there's a spot for comments on the side. And then any additional information can be included down here. So what are some pros and cons that we see with this?
It's simple, but on the one hand, it may be too simple.
Yeah. Yeah,
It doesn't go in depth enough.
yeah. I agree, Taryn. I also I
don't like the minus part. I mean, if you don't see it, you don't see it. The minus kind of gives a negative annotation that, oh, you're not doing it, even though it wasn't maybe a time that you could be doing it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree, Dawn. I like the use of the rubric system a little bit more than I do just a plus or minus, because there's so much gray, right? Like somebody could be doing something and they may just need a little bit of extra practice, but it doesn't mean that they necessarily need a minus next to their name. Yeah. All right. The next one we're going to look at is from the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching. And this is something that was actually posted by TEA as a possible walkthrough tour. And this one does go back a little bit to the rubric system, and it has the not attempted, attempted, or effectively implemented. And then it looks at kind of three different categories: the planning, the instruction, and the environment. So what are some pros and cons that we see with this?
I like the environment, and someone touched on it earlier, is that sometimes you have behaviors going on inside the classroom that's affecting the entire lesson time.
Yeah.
And sometimes that just, and that's where we need to step in and decide, is this just a one-off behavior, or is this a repeated behavior with specific students? And, strategizing how that plays into a classroom setting.
Yeah, I agree. I think this gives an opportunity for those teachers who do need a little bit of growth with classroom management to address that there as well.
I agree with Lee. I think our current one should include classroom environment.
Okay.
Mhm.
What are some cons we see with this?
Besides all the lines.
Yeah.
It is, to me, it's way too busy, even though it's simply worded. I mean, it's not a lot of verbiage, but I look at that and no,
Yeah.
but
It's definitely
I
a
think
little bit busy.
I think one thing that we have to decide, ours is very specific to the content
Mm-hmm.
and what should be in those content areas. And all of these, and I'm assuming probably Marzano's will as well, are overall best practices in instruction. So as a school, we would have to decide, do we want to go towards that? Or do you want to have a deeper dive into what is happening in the content areas?
So I'm so glad you noticed that, because that's something that I want to kind of look at in just a moment is, do we need specific walkthrough forms for literacy and math, or are there, because are we looking at giving feedback on routines, or are we giving feedback on the instructional strategies that are occurring? And in that case, a good instructional strategy is a good instructional strategy no matter what subject you're teaching, right? So maybe when we go to make our walkthrough form, maybe we tweak it so that we're focused a little more on those instructional strategies and not necessarily just on the components of each block.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think the feedback that we give, if it's something towards content, we can look at the best practices from Plano
Uh-huh.
and say, okay, well, part of math content should have been ... and get feedback on that maybe.
Yeah, I agree totally. And then our last one is Marzano's. And with Marzano's, they typically, you know how in our Plano ISD instructional model, we have those like 42 things we're looking at? They typically have like a different rubric for every single one of those things. I personally feel that as either a teacher or somebody who's doing walkthroughs, that's way too overwhelming to be able to implement effectively, right? So I took this one that kind of summarizes a lot of those into one. But it says the specific teacher evidence that we're looking for and you check off which things you see. And then it also has a student evidence component, which I did kind of like. And then it gives a scale overall for innovating, applying, developing, beginning, or not using at all. For learning goals, for questioning. And then it moves into tracking student progress and celebrating success. And then establishing classroom routines. Okay, so you can see this one's like lengthy.
Yeah.
There's one for every single component. But it's really clear about the success criteria for each component too. Okay. So what are some pros and cons we see with this? Specifically in this,
I like
first one.
how instead of just checking that, yes, it's evident, I
Mhm.
like how it breaks it down to say how is that person progressing?
Yeah,
Yes.
I like that too, because it tells you how you can grow into the next category.
Yes.
I like the student evidence component of it,
Mhm.
because it's,
I'm being
it
a bad
takes two.
timekeeper. The time is up.
Oh,
Time's up. Okay.
For the
No,
do you want me to add minutes?
that's perfect.
Mhm.
Crystal, if you can add like 1 minute to us and we'll
Yep.
finish talking about this and then we'll move on. Yeah, so I definitely agree. I like the scale, the rubric, and I like the student evidence component. What are some cons to this besides, I kind of already said them a little bit, but
A lot of words.
I mean,
Yeah.
a lot.
yeah, and that's every element. So I don't know if we would do the 3 elements that Plano had, asking in-depth questions, student interaction, and the complex tasks.
Yes.
Just take those parts instead of like all 47 of the elements that Marzano has.
Yes. Okay. So that's exactly kind of along the line. So the 3 components that we're focused on as a district is engaging students in complex tasks. And I got this straight from that quality components document from our curriculum department. So engaging students in complex tasks, and they already have, so they have some strategies we can use. And then they already have, this is supposed to be used as a self-reflection rubric, but we could also use this as the rubric we're looking for as well, right? Can y'all see that? Yeah. So we have the engaging students in complex tasks. We have organizing students to interact and collaborate, and then we have asking in-depth questions. Okay, so if we focused our walkthrough form on just those 3 components, do you think we'd be able to kind of see where we currently are with our instructional strategies and then how we could grow?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So I made our walkthrough form as a Google Doc for right now because I felt like that was kind of easier in the meeting setting, but we can turn it into, do y'all like getting them in a Google form where it goes straight to your email? I know as somebody doing walkthroughs, that's super helpful to just be able to pull that up. What do y'all think?
I like the Google form.
You like the Google form?
Google
Okay.
form.
So I'll take this document and I'll turn it into a Google form after we go through our meeting today. I just thought it'd be easier just to have one doc where we're kind of dropping things in than it is in a Google form. All right, so what are some things we want to make sure we see in this Google Doc or in this walkthrough form?
Hey, Crystal, Rachel, can I talk about like the dyslexia part of it?
Yes, absolutely, please.
So, obviously, any of the accommodations that each of the dyslexia kids get,
Mhm.
and I feel like if you're admin, you sat in most of those ARD, so you more or less would kind of know.
Uh-huh.
And for my dyslexia kids, I usually choose the same ones because it just works for them.
Right.
So I'm not saying that they need to have all their IEP and a checklist and everything, but just kind of be aware of, are they using, this was kind of a big problem last year, was that if they got text to speech,
Mhm.
sometimes it wasn't used. And if that wasn't available, then the teacher should read if the story or the question and the answers to them. And sometimes that doesn't happen. So I feel like you kind of need to know more or less like who's dyslexic. I'm not saying memorize every kid and every IEP,
Uh-huh.
but just kind of be aware of that.
So what
And
if we add a component, like one of our check boxes could say like evidence of IEP/504 accommodations
implemented or
implemented in the classroom?
expected or
Yes.
something.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, and I guess like are they utilizing assistive technology?
Okay.
But I guess that could still count as
Yeah,
following
I think
their.
that would go with that accommodation piece.
So when I was a SPED teacher, I was in this teacher's classroom, and she was in the military. And
Uh-huh.
I'm telling you, everything had its place.
Uh-huh.
And she had it was kind of an agenda. And so I, as a SPED teacher, could walk in the middle of the lesson, sit down and be like, okay, I wouldn't have to ask people or ask her, what are we doing? What do we do? I'm sure
Right.
Leah can,
Yeah.
back me up on this, because sometimes you walk in, you don't know what's going on. I never had to do that in her classroom. She
Okay.
was organized. Everything had its place. Everything was well labeled. She had a checklist of what was going on in that particular block.
Uh-huh.
And it was routines. And it was easy.
So do we add that section, Olivia? You know how we were saying we need something about the classroom environment?
Yeah, I would think so,
we
because
add that as a
and the rules were clear. I never had to say, like, if I can't, I go to the restroom. I'm like, because each teacher, and I'm sure Leah, each teacher had a different rule for how to sharpen a pencil, how to go to the restroom. Hers
Yeah.
were clear. I never had to say, well, what do y'all usually do? Do you ask your teacher to sharpen the pencil? Do you just get up? Because it
Yeah.
was always clear, and it wasn't. So, and this is another thing for dyslexic kids, the visual noise. She didn't
Right.
have a lot of visual noise because she was also, I think she was ADHD. So sometimes when classrooms are it's too much on the wall. There's, the rules
So I'm
aren't,
looking at one of the forms, Olivia, from the other schools, and it has managing classroom procedures, managing student behavior,
Yes.
organizing
Yes.
a physical space.
Yes. Yes.
So do we want to
So
incorporate
something
some of that in our
Well, I think it's good for the students, but again, like for someone a special ed teacher that walks in and is supporting, or a parent, like I think it's good for them too because everything's clear and concise. I don't have to stop you and say, what's your rule for sharpening a pencil, or how do you go to the restroom?
So I
Because
don't know how to say that. Whether do we put classroom procedures or
I would say that
clear,
routines and
or I mean, I
procedures
don't
are
know.
set and that everything's clearly labeled and organized.
okay, so what if we said classroom procedures are evident and students follow them, or should we just say classroom procedures are evident?
I would say that.
Or
Okay.
do we want to put classroom procedures are set, and then we have that rubric of not evident, partial? One of the schools had like three categories
Right.
where it was
Those are
like,
more
yes, it's
good.
evident, no, it's not evident, and there was like a middle one.
Okay, so we like that rubric. I think that was the National Institute for Excellence in Teaching.
Or we could do the rubric how Marzano has it. It's just that's a lot. But yeah, not attempted,
And
or we could say
effectively.
not evident, and efficiently,
Okay.
effectively, whatever,
So this one has 3 bullet points there. Students self-reflect on their learning. Teacher communicates procedures and visual. This says virtual,
Uh-huh.
but and routines. And then students utilize procedures to participate responsibly. Are we good with those 3 bullet points?
I like those 3.
Like those 3?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're just
Yes.
gonna copy paste those over, and then I'm going to merge that. Insert. Okay, and then would somebody mind reading those headers to me again? It was not attempted, and
Hold on.
Evidently,
And
And
then it was
effectively-
effectively implemented.
effectively.
Effectively implemented.
okay. And then let's see. It said students self-reflect on their learning. And I feel like those 3 bullet points. Oh, and then maybe we'll add in, Olivia, we can add in here evidence of IEP/504 accommodations being utilized.
Yes.
Accommodations.
Just
And
evidence.
then, I mean, there's L and there's MTSS. So, do we just want to put?
Oh,
Do we just want to put accommodations, or want to list out?
yeah, no, we'll say evidence of
MTSS would have one,
accommodations being utilized.
Lee, your goal should be to get everybody's bags ready for them.
I'm so excited about those. But they worked well. My little thing worked well. So
Yeah, we should
And-
start at the beginning of the year.
yes.
Also, for dyslexic kids, there verbal feedback, but not too much. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, you know, just so, because sometimes they doubt themselves a lot, so they just need a little check-in, and
Uh-huh.
it doesn't need to be like, you know, does that, like, you don't need we don't need a dissertation.
Right.
Just like, "You're on the right track, thumbs up."
Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
that they need for instructions, because sometimes it's hard for them to follow sequential instructions because it's a lot. Because by the time you've moved on to the third direction, they're still trying to make sense of the first one.
Okay. So
So
what if
for
I said appropriate teacher?
instruction and just how their feedback on how they're doing, you
Yeah.
know, just, and then at the end too, just kind of close it out with, "You did a great job. I like the way you followed through. Or, you did a great job." You know, just some kind of a verbal, limited verbal feedback before, during, and after their work. Does that
Right.
make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I just include appropriate teacher feedback.
Yes.
Okay. So then we move into engaging students in complex tasks. And if we look at this document from, I believe it's from the Art and Science of Teaching, it gives some really specific examples of things we could look for. So like so it gives specific lead forward strategies, and then it also gives like mind mapping, cognitive conflict, infographics, scaffolding, and varying the way students demonstrate their evidence of learning. And then it gives us these really specific statements right here. The teacher asks students to identify obstacles or constraints to achieving goals, find solutions, and predict the effectiveness of different solutions. And then it also gives specific teacher evidence that you could use in like your I can statements and things like that. So I'm wondering if, just because that's a lot of information to try to include, and we're trying to keep this walkthrough form as concise as possible, right? So what if we use these statements right here? Students can clearly engage in cognitively complex tasks. Students can explain and defend the conclusions they have generated, and students have produced artifacts from the cognitively complex task. And then we could include this rubric right here of innovating, applying, developing, beginning, or not using. Would that be okay? Yeah? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to copy these over.
The only question I have is
Uh-huh.
like, if I'm a new teacher in
4
artifacts,
minutes and
like
8 seconds.
how am I gonna, how do I understand that?
Yeah.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
If I'm a new teacher, like the students are producing artifacts, like
Uh-huh.
how will I understand that?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think that comes in the planning stage as we're sitting in those PLCs and we're answering those 4 PLC questions of how will we know the students are learning. We can make sure to answer that then and kind of bring in that content knowledge and that vocabulary with those new teachers there as well. Okay, delete row. And then they had, did they have?
And that was on 5, was it?
I think so, yeah. Would it be helpful to have like a quick description of innovating, applying, developing, beginning, not using? Would it underneath each one of those titles?
Yes.
Okay, so I can definitely go back and do that. Applying, developing. I'm gonna clean this form up. I'm not exactly sure why
I think it was not.
formatting is being all weird, but
I think your last one was not evident.
yes. And then I have 2 extra. All right, so if we're using that for engaging students in complex tasks, for interaction and collaboration, are we good with using those same bullet points that Marzano's and the new Art and Science of Teaching gives us? And then same for asking in-depth questions.
For the rubric? Oh, the same bullet points.
So it would
Yeah, I'm
look,
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
that way it looks the same for each one of the components that we're looking for.
I think the part to add to that Marzano doesn't consider is that language component that we have in ours, like
Especially
whether
at
it's
a year like-
vocabulary or instance or something to help support that academic language.
yes.
1 minute and 24.
Okay. So
Okay.
Crystal, I'm looking at the interaction and collaboration. I feel like that would be the best place to include a language component. Do you think, it says students move quickly into groups and with purpose. Students must treat each other with respect using established norms. Students interact in a manner that deepens their understanding, and students work efficiently in groups. Do you think if we included one extra component that said like, teacher provides sentence stems in order to scaffold student responses? Would that be?
Sentence stems and vocabulary, because
Sentence stems and
sometimes it's like a
vocabulary?
vocabulary bank.
Okay.
Mhm.
All
that-
right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So then I'm gonna do this. And okay, so as long as I'll go in and add the correct sentence stems from those documents, but how do we feel about how this looks? Do we need like one spot at the bottom to give those glows and grows? I know Dawn said she really liked getting those. Yes.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
So we'll
Yes.
include that.
It would be nice. So are you thinking in each component have that space,
I'm thinking
or
one overall.
or at the bottom and overall?
I'm
I think
thinking
one
one at the
overall.
bottom overall.
Okay.
Because I'm just thinking about those
Okay.
walkthroughs are condensed down to like 10 minutes and 10 to 15 minutes. And I'm thinking if I'm trying to give a glow and a grow for each one of those, that's probably going to get overwhelming for both me as an administrator and you as a teacher getting that back. Does that sound good? All right, y'all. Well, thank you so much for participating in our meeting today. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording. Stop recording.